"Your son left me. Come get your grandkids now." Those words, screaming through my phone at 4 in the morning, shattered my peaceful sleep and changed everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law. But as I rushed through the empty streets toward my son's house in the darkness, I had no idea that Caroline's hysterical phone call was just the beginning of a web of lies that would expose who she really was. My name is Ruth Parker, and at 62, I thought I'd seen enough of life's surprises. I'd been widowed for 5 years, raised my son Daniel as a single mother after his father died in a construction accident, and worked as a nurse for 37 years before retiring. I'd learned to handle emergencies, to stay calm under pressure, and to read people pretty accurately. But apparently, I'd completely misread my daughter-in-law. The phone call came at exactly 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in September. I know because I stared at the digital clock, wondering who could be calling at such an ungodly hour. My first thought was that something had happened to Daniel. "Ruth? Ruth, are you there?" Caroline's voice was shrill, panicked, almost unrecognizable. "Caroline, honey, what's wrong? Is Daniel okay?" "No, nothing's okay. He left me, Ruth. Your son walked out on his family." She was sobbing now, her words barely coherent through the hysteria. "He said he couldn't handle the pressure anymore and he just left." My stomach dropped. Daniel had seemed fine when I'd talked to him 3 days ago. Sure, he'd mentioned being tired from work, but nothing that suggested he was on the verge of abandoning his family. "Caroline, slow down. What exactly happened?" "We had a fight about money, about the kids, about everything, and he said he was done, that he couldn't do this anymore. He packed a bag and left, Ruth. He left me here with Lily and Mason and no car and no money, and I can't do this alone." The panic in her voice was real, but something felt off. In all the years Daniel had been married to Caroline, through every argument and stress, he'd never once suggested he might walk away from his children. Daniel adored 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Mason. He'd rather cut off his own arm than abandon them. "Where are the children now, Caroline?" "They're here, they're sleeping, but Ruth, I need you to come get them. I can't take care of them like this. I'm falling apart, and they need their grandmother. I'm on my way." "But Caroline, have you tried calling Daniel? Maybe he won't answer. I've called 20 times and it goes straight to voicemail." Her voice cracked with fresh sobs. "Ruth, please, I'm begging you. Come get Lily and Mason. I just can't handle this right now." I was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with one hand while holding the phone with the other. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Caroline, try to stay calm. We'll figure this out." The drive to Daniel's house took me through empty suburban streets, lined with dark windows and sleeping families. Normal families, where husbands didn't apparently walk out in the middle of the night and wives didn't have complete breakdowns before dawn. As I pulled into the driveway of the modest 2-story house Daniel and Caroline had bought 3 years ago, I noticed something strange. Caroline's car wasn't in the driveway. Daniel's was gone too, which made sense if he'd really left. But where was Caroline's Honda? The front door opened before I could knock, and Caroline appeared in the doorway looking like she'd been through a hurricane. Her usually perfect blonde hair was tangled, her makeup smeared, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. "Ruth, thank God you're here." She threw herself into my arms with dramatic desperation. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how to handle this. Where are Lily and Mason?" "Upstairs, sleeping. They don't know what happened yet. I didn't want to wake them and upset them more than necessary." I followed Caroline into the house, immediately struck by how quiet everything seemed. The living room looked normal. Toys scattered around, Daniel's reading glasses on the coffee table, yesterday's mail still unopened on the kitchen counter. It didn't look like the aftermath of a marriage-ending fight. "Caroline, tell me exactly what happened. Start from the beginning." She collapsed onto the couch, wrapping her arms around herself dramatically. "It started when Daniel got home from work yesterday. He was in a bad mood, complaining about his boss, about money, about how tired he was. Then Lily spilled juice on his laptop and he snapped. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Subscribe to this channel and write in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel." "He snapped how?" "He yelled at her, Ruth. Really yelled. I've never seen him like that before. Then Mason started crying because he was scared, and I tried to calm everyone down, but Daniel just got angrier. He said he couldn't handle the stress of being the only one working while I stayed home with the kids. That didn't sound like Daniel either. He'd always been proud of Caroline staying home with the children, said it was important for them to have their mother there during their early years. What happened next? We argued after the kids went to bed. Really argued. He said he felt like he was drowning, that everything was always his responsibility, that he never got a break. And I said some things I probably shouldn't have. What kind of things? Caroline's eyes shifted away from mine, focusing on her hands. I told him that maybe if he made more money, I wouldn't have to worry about every penny. That maybe if he was more ambitious, we could afford a better life. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the early morning air. Caroline had always seemed supportive of Daniel's career as an IT project manager. It was stable work with good benefits, enough to support their family comfortably, if not luxuriously. And then, he said he was tired of nothing ever being enough for me, that he worked 60 hours a week and still felt like a failure in his own home. He went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. That was around midnight. I looked around the house again, noticing details I'd missed before. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of the kind of explosive fight Caroline was describing. And something else bothered me. If Daniel had really left in anger at midnight, why had Caroline waited over 4 hours to call me? Caroline, where's your car? What? Your Honda. It's not in the driveway. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that 37 years of nursing had taught me to notice. It's in the shop. Has been since Sunday. That's why I said I had no way to take the kids anywhere. Since Sunday? But Daniel left last night. Why didn't you mention the car was in the shop when you were arguing about money? Another pause. I forgot. I was upset, Ruth. I wasn't thinking clearly. Something was very wrong here. But before I could ask more questions, I heard a small voice from upstairs. Grandma Ruth? Is that you? Lily appeared at the top of the stairs in her favorite princess pajamas, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Behind her, Mason peeked around the corner, his hair sticking up in every direction. Hi, sweetheart, I called up to them. Come down here and give Grandma a hug. As they ran down the stairs and into my arms, I noticed something else. They didn't seem upset or traumatized. They seemed like two normal children who'd just woken up and were happy to see their grandmother. Where's Daddy? Lily asked, looking around the room. Caroline's face went white. Daddy had to go on a trip, sweetheart. Another work trip? Mason asked. Is he going to bring us presents? Work trip? I looked at Caroline sharply, but she was avoiding my eyes. Something like that, she said weakly. But as I hugged my grandchildren and looked at Caroline's guilty expression, I realized that nothing about this situation was what it seemed. And the more questions I asked, the more I suspected that my son hadn't abandoned his family at all. The question was, what had really happened here, and where was Daniel? More importantly, where was Caroline's car, and why did she look more guilty than heartbroken? Mommy, can we have pancakes for breakfast? Mason asked, tugging on Caroline's robe. Daddy always makes pancakes on Tuesday mornings. Caroline's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, panic, then something that looked almost like annoyance. Not today, Mason. Mommy's too upset to cook. I knelt down to Mason's level, smoothing his messy hair. How about Grandma Ruth makes breakfast while Mommy gets dressed? Would you like that? Both children nodded enthusiastically, and I noticed Caroline's shoulders relax with what seemed like relief. As I headed toward the kitchen with Lily and Mason, I heard Caroline's phone buzz with a text message. Oh, she said, snatching it up quickly. I'll be right back. I need to make a phone call. She practically ran upstairs, leaving me alone with the children. As I opened the refrigerator to look for pancake ingredients, Lily climbed onto a kitchen stool and watched me curiously. Grandma Ruth, why is Mommy crying? Sometimes grown-ups get sad, sweetheart, but everything's going to be okay. Is Daddy really on a work trip? Because he told me yesterday he was going to Dubai for his job, but that's not until today. I froze with the milk carton in my hand. Dubai? Uh-huh. He said he had to fly on a big airplane to Dubai for 3 days for work meetings. He showed me on the map where it is. My mind raced. If Daniel was scheduled to leave for Dubai today, then he hadn't abandoned his family last night. He was on a planned business trip. Lily, when exactly did Daddy tell you about this trip? Last week, he said he'd be gone 3 days and he'd bring me and Mason something special from the airport. Mason nodded from where he was playing with toy cars on the kitchen floor. Daddy said Dubai has really tall buildings, taller than our house. I set down the milk and pulled out my phone, dialing Daniel's number. It went straight to voicemail, just as Caroline had said. But that made sense now. International phone service was expensive and spotty, and Daniel was practical about things like that. From upstairs, I could hear Caroline's muffled voice, but I couldn't make out words. However, the tone didn't sound like someone calling for help or trying to track down a missing husband. It sounded like someone having an urgent, possibly secretive conversation. "Kids, why don't you go wash your hands while I start the pancakes?" As they ran off, I quietly climbed a few steps up the staircase, just enough to hear Caroline's voice more clearly. "No, I can't talk long. She's here now. Yes, his mother. I told you this was the only way. 3 days. That's all we need." My blood turned cold. Caroline was talking to someone about Daniel's 3-day trip as if it were an opportunity, not a crisis. "Just stick to the plan. I'll handle things here." No, she believes me. I crept back down to the kitchen before Caroline finished her call, my mind spinning with implications. Caroline hadn't been abandoned. She'd planned something around Daniel's business trip. But what? 20 minutes later, Caroline came downstairs looking more composed but still agitated. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, fixed her hair, and washed the smeared makeup from her face. "The pancakes smell wonderful," she said, but her voice was strained. "Ruth, I can't thank you enough for coming. I know I must sound crazy, calling you so early, but I just completely fell apart. It's understandable, honey. Unexpected situations can be overwhelming." I kept my voice neutral while watching her carefully. "Have you heard from Daniel at all?" "No, nothing. His phone is still going to voicemail." "Well, international calls can be tricky," I said casually. "Time zones, service issues." Caroline's face went white. "International?" "Dubai," I said, watching her reaction. Lily mentioned Daniel's business trip to Dubai. For a moment, Caroline looked like she'd been slapped. Then she quickly recovered. Oh yes, the business trip. I forgot about... he did mention that before he left, but I thought he'd canceled it after our fight." But her explanation sounded hollow, rehearsed badly after the fact. "When was he supposed to leave for Dubai?" Today, I think? But he left last night, so obviously he's not going now." Lily looked up from her pancakes, confused. "But Mommy, Daddy said goodbye to us yesterday morning before school, and said he'd see us when he gets back from Dubai on Thursday." Caroline's fork clattered against her plate. "Lily, you're confused, sweetheart. Daddy left after you went to sleep last night." "No, he didn't. He wasn't here when we got home from school yesterday. Remember? You said he already left for his trip." I watched this exchange with growing certainty that Caroline had been caught in a massive lie. Daniel hadn't left after a fight last night. He'd left yesterday morning for a planned business trip to Dubai, just as he'd told the children he would. "Caroline," I said carefully, "I'm a little confused about the timeline. When exactly did this fight happen?" She looked trapped, her eyes darting between me and the children. It was complicated, Ruth. Everything happened so fast. And your car being in the shop since Sunday, which shop is doing the work? The one on Maple Street, Johnson's Auto." But I knew Johnson's Auto. They'd been closed for renovations all month. I'd driven past their boarded-up storefront just last week. "Caroline, I think we need to have an honest conversation." "The children, why don't you go play in the living room for a few minutes?" After Lily and Mason left the kitchen, I turned to face Caroline directly. "Where is your car? And where is my son, really?" "I told you Daniel left." "Caroline," I used the firm voice that had stopped countless patients from lying to me over the years. "Daniel is in Dubai on a business trip. He left yesterday morning as planned. The children know it, and now I know it. So I'll ask you again, what's really going on here?" Caroline stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact second she realized her story had completely fallen apart. Her shoulders sagged, and something like defiance flashed in her eyes. "Fine," she said, her voice taking on a hard edge I'd never heard before. "You want the truth? The truth is I'm 29 years old, and I'm tired of being stuck in this house all day with 2 kids while your son works all the time. I'm tired of having no money of my own, no life of my own, no identity except Daniel's wife and the kid's mother. So you lied about him abandoning you because I needed someone to watch the kids while I figured some things out." The casual way she said it, like my grandchildren were an inconvenience to be managed, sent a chill through me. "Caroline, where were you planning to go? And where is your car?" She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "That's none of your business, Ruth. It became my business when you called me at 4 in the morning claiming my son had abandoned his children." Caroline turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw the real woman behind the sweet daughter-in-law mask. She looked calculating, almost cruel. The kids are fine, Ruth. You're here now, so they're taken care of. That's all that matters. Carolyn, what have you done? But even as I asked the question, I had a sinking feeling that I was about to discover that my son's wife was not the woman any of us thought she was, and whatever she had planned, it was going to tear my family apart. Carolyn walked to the kitchen window and stood there for a long moment, her back to me. When she turned around, the mask was completely gone. The sweet, overwhelmed young mother I'd known for 7 years had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. Ruth, I love your son. I do. But I'm suffocating here. Do you have any idea what it's like to be 29 and feel like your life is over? Caroline, plenty of people manage to feel fulfilled while raising children. No. She slammed her hand on the counter, making the coffee cups jump. You don't understand. You had a career. You were a nurse. You had purpose. You made your own money. I went from my parents' house to college to marriage to motherhood without ever figuring out who I am. I felt a flicker of sympathy despite everything. Honey, if you're struggling with identity issues, there are ways to address that. You could go back to school, find part-time work, join groups. With what money, Ruth? Daniel controls every penny. I have to ask permission to buy groceries. Do you know how humiliating that is? That didn't sound like the Daniel I'd raised, but I pushed that aside for the moment. Where is your car, Caroline? She laughed bitterly. My car? I don't have a car, Ruth. Daniel has a car. I have permission to drive Daniel's second car when he doesn't need it. Everything in this house belongs to Daniel because Daniel pays for it. But you could get a job and pay for childcare with what money? Do you know how much daycare costs? By the time I paid for 2 kids in daycare, I'd be working just to break even. Daniel says it makes more financial sense for me to stay home. I was starting to see the cracks in what I'd assumed was a happy marriage, but that didn't explain the lies, the panic, the mysterious phone call. Caroline, even if you're feeling trapped, lying about Daniel abandoning his family isn't the solution. What were you really planning to do? She sat back down at the kitchen table, but now she looked defiant rather than defeated. I was planning to take a break, just a few days to clear my head and figure things out. A break where? And with who? That's my business. It became my business when you involved me and my grandchildren. From the living room, I could hear Lily and Mason playing quietly, their voices an innocent counterpoint to the tension crackling in the kitchen. I thought about them waking up this morning without their father, being told conflicting stories about where he was, sensing their mother's stress but not understanding it. Caroline, those children need stability. They need to know their parents are reliable and honest. You can't just disappear because you're having a personal crisis. Can't I? Her voice was cold now. Ruth, I didn't ask to be a mother at 22. I didn't ask to give up everything I might have become, to change diapers and wipe noses and pretend to be happy about it. The honesty was brutal, but at least it was honest. Do you love your children? Of course I love them. But Ruth, I can love them and still need space from them. I can be a good mother and still want a life of my own. But lying and disappearing isn't taking space. It's abandoning responsibility. For 3 days. Daniel's gone for 3 days, and I need 3 days to figure out what I want from my life. And you were going to leave Lily and Mason with me for 3 days without telling me the truth? I was going to tell you eventually, once I got back and figured things out. I felt my temper rising. As a nurse, I'd dealt with exhausted, overwhelmed parents many times, but I'd never encountered someone who thought lying and manipulation were acceptable ways to handle family stress. Caroline, where were you planning to go? And don't tell me it's none of my business, because I'm not babysitting my grandchildren based on lies. She stared at me for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. There's someone I've been talking to. Someone who makes me feel like the woman I used to be before I became just mom and wife. My stomach dropped. Caroline, are you having an affair? It's not an affair. It's complicated. Affairs usually are complicated. That doesn't make them less destructive. Ruth, I haven't done anything wrong yet, but Kevin, he makes me remember what it feels like to be desired, to be interesting, to be more than just a caregiver. Kevin, he's my personal trainer. Well, he was. I had to stop going to the gym because Daniel said it was too expensive. I was starting to piece together a picture I didn't like, and Kevin was going to take you somewhere for these 3 days? Cabo. He has a timeshare there, and he invited me to come with him, just to talk, to figure things out. Caroline, do you hear yourself? You were going to abandon your children to go to Mexico with another man while your husband was away on business? I wasn't abandoning them. You're here now. They're safe and cared for. By lies. You got me here by lying about Daniel leaving you. She stood up again, agitated. Because I knew you wouldn't watch them if you knew the real reason. Ruth, I'm drowning here. I'm 29 years old and I feel like I'm 80. I can't remember the last time I had a conversation about anything except cartoons and snack preferences. I can't remember the last time I felt attractive or interesting or valuable. Despite my anger, I felt that flicker of sympathy again. Motherhood could be isolating, especially for young women who'd never had a chance to establish their own identities first. Caroline, I understand feeling overwhelmed. Do you? Do you really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you raised your son and built a career and had a full life. I've had 7 years of goldfish crackers and Sesame Street and pretending that's enough. But Caroline, there are ways to address those feelings without betraying your family's trust. She laughed harshly. Are there? Because I've tried talking to Daniel about how I feel, and he just says we can't afford for me to do anything about it. I've tried joining mom groups, but they just want to talk about potty training and sleep schedules. I've tried online classes, but I can't focus with 2 kids interrupting every 5 minutes. So your solution was to lie to your husband's mother and run off to Mexico with another man. My solution was to take 3 days to remember who I am when I'm not being pulled in 12 directions. From the living room, Lily called out, "Grandma Ruth, Mason spilled juice on the couch." As I went to help with the spill, I realized that Caroline's crisis, while real, had led her to make choices that could destroy her family. The question was whether she understood that yet, or if she was too caught up in her own unhappiness to see the damage she was causing. When I returned to the kitchen, Caroline was looking at her phone with an expression I couldn't read. "Caroline, where is your phone showing that call came from this morning? The one you took upstairs?" She looked up at me with something like defiance. "Kevin, he's waiting at the airport." "The airport? Our flight leaves at 10 a.m. I looked at the clock. It was 8:30. "Caroline, you called me to babysit so you could catch a flight to Mexico with your personal trainer." "Ruth, I need this. I need to know if there's still something inside me worth saving." What I realized, looking at my daughter-in-law's desperate face, was that Caroline wasn't evil. She was selfish, immature, and making terrible choices, but she was also drowning in a life she'd never really chosen. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I stood in the kitchen, processing what Caroline had just told me. She had a flight to Mexico leaving in an hour and a half, and she expected me to watch her children while she went off with another man to find herself. "Caroline, you cannot be serious." "Ruth, I know how this sounds, but I've been planning this for weeks. It's just 3 days. Kevin has been so understanding about what I'm going through. Kevin doesn't know what you're going through. Kevin knows you're an unhappy married woman, which makes you an easy target." Her face flushed with anger. "You don't know anything about Kevin. He listens to me. He sees me as more than just someone's wife and mother. Because that's what men like Kevin do, Caroline. They prey on vulnerable women by making them feel special and misunderstood. You're wrong about him." "Am I?" "Caroline, has Kevin ever suggested you talk to Daniel about your feelings? Has he encouraged you to seek marriage counseling? Has he recommended you find healthy ways to build your own identity while maintaining your family?" Her silence was telling. "Or has Kevin suggested that you deserve better, that you're too good for your current life, that you should take risks and live for yourself?" "It's not like that. It's exactly like that." I sat down across from her, using the calm voice I'd perfected during 37 years of talking to people in crisis. "Caroline, I've seen this pattern before. Predatory men target young mothers because you're isolated, overwhelmed, and vulnerable. They offer excitement and validation while encouraging you to blow up your stable life. Kevin isn't predatory. He's successful. He's independent. He's a personal trainer who's convincing a married mother to abandon her children for a weekend in Cabo. That's not successful, Caroline. That's manipulative." She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window again. "You don't understand, Ruth. You don't know what it's like to feel invisible in your own life. You're right. I don't know exactly what that feels like. But Caroline, I do know what it feels like to be a single mother working 60-hour weeks to support a child. I know what it's like to be so tired you can barely function, but you keep going because someone depends on you. That's different. You chose that life. Did I? Caroline, I was 26 when my husband died. I didn't choose to be a single mother any more than you chose to feel overwhelmed, but I chose how to handle it. From the living room, I heard Mason calling, "Mommy, I'm hungry." Caroline ignored him completely, still staring out the window. I got up and went to check on the children, finding them both looking around the living room with that slightly anxious expression kids get when they sense adult tension. "Are you hungry, buddy?" I asked Mason, ruffling his hair. "Let's get you a snack." As I prepared apple slices and crackers, Lily appeared beside me. "Grandma Ruth, is Mommy sick?" "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "She's acting weird, and she looks like she does when she has a headache, but she won't talk to us." I looked toward the kitchen, where Caroline was still staring out the window, completely absorbed in her own drama, while her children wondered why their mother was acting strangely. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to figure out, Lily, but you and Mason don't need to worry about that. That's grown-up stuff." When I returned to the kitchen, Caroline was sitting at the table with her head in her hands. "Caroline, I want you to think about something. Right now, your children are confused and worried because they can sense something is wrong, but they don't understand what. They're looking for reassurance from their mother, but you're so focused on your own crisis that you're not emotionally available to them." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I know I'm being selfish, Ruth, but I can't help how I feel." "You can't help how you feel, but you can help what you do about it. Caroline, if you get on that plane today, you will be crossing a line that you can't uncross." "What do you mean?" "I mean that abandoning your children to go away with another man isn't just a mistake. It's a betrayal that will change how your family sees you forever. It's 3 days. It's not about the time, Caroline. It's about the choice. It's about calling your mother-in-law at 4 in the morning with lies to manipulate her into covering for your affair. It's not an affair. What would you call it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "I just know that I'm miserable, and Kevin makes me feel like maybe I don't have to be." I felt a deep sadness for this young woman who was about to destroy her family because she didn't know how to ask for help in healthy ways. "Caroline, what if I told you that there are solutions to everything you're feeling? Real solutions that don't require betraying your family or abandoning your children." "Like what?" "Like marriage counseling to help you and Daniel communicate better about money and independence, like finding part-time work or volunteer opportunities that give you purpose outside the home, like building friendships with other women who understand the challenges of motherhood." "Daniel won't go to counseling. He thinks our marriage is fine." "Have you ever directly told Daniel that you're unhappy enough to consider leaving?" Another silence. "Caroline, have you ever actually told your husband how desperate you feel? Not hints, not complaints about money, but a direct conversation about your emotional needs?" He wouldn't understand. "How do you know if you've never tried?" She looked at her phone. "Ruth, I have to make a decision. The flight will leave with or without you. But your children will remember this day for the rest of their lives. They'll remember whether their mother was here when they needed her or whether she chose to disappear." I stood up and walked to the kitchen doorway, where I could see Lily and Mason on the living room floor, building something with blocks. They looked so small, so innocent, so completely unaware that their mother was considering walking away from them. "Caroline, look at your children. Really look at them." She joined me in the doorway, and I saw her face soften for the first time all morning. "They're beautiful," she said quietly. "They are, and they love you completely and unconditionally. They don't care if you feel like you've lost your identity. They don't care if you're not sure who you are anymore. They just need their mother to be present and reliable." "But Ruth, what if being their mother isn't enough for me? Then you find ways to be more than just their mother. But you do it while still being their mother, not by abandoning that responsibility." Her phone buzzed with a text, and I saw her glance at it. Kevin, probably wondering where she was. "Caroline, that man doesn't love you. He doesn't even know you. He knows a version of you that's unhappy and vulnerable, and he's taking advantage of that. You don't know him. I know that men who truly care about women don't ask them to abandon their children." The truth was settling over her face, and I could see the exact moment she realized that her grand romantic escape was actually just a sordid affair with a man who was willing to help her betray her family. "What am I going to do, Ruth?" she whispered. "You're going to choose your family. You're going to text Kevin that you're not coming, And then you're going to figure out how to build the life you want without destroying the life you have. But even as I said it, I could see that Caroline was still torn between the fantasy of escape and the reality of responsibility. And I realized that this decision would define not just her future, but the future of my entire family. Caroline stared at her phone for what felt like an eternity, her thumb hovering over the screen. I could see the internal battle playing out across her face. Duty versus desire. Responsibility versus escape. Ruth, you don't understand how hard this is for me. You're right, I don't. But Caroline, hard decisions don't become easier by making destructive choices. She looked toward the living room where Lily and Mason were still playing, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. What if I resent them? What if I stay and spend the rest of my life feeling trapped and angry? Then you get help. You find a therapist. You join support groups. You figure out healthy ways to build the life you want. But Caroline, children can sense resentment. If you're going to stay, you need to find a way to genuinely want to be here. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked at the message and her face went pale. What is it? Kevin. He says the gate is closing in 20 minutes, and if I'm not there, he's going without me. Good. Let him go. Ruth, you don't understand. This might be my only chance. Your only chance for what? To run away from your problems? Caroline, that's not a chance. That's cowardice. She looked stung. I'm not a coward. Then prove it. Stay here and face your life instead of running away from it. But I could see she was still wavering, still tempted by the fantasy of escape. I realized I needed to try a different approach. Caroline, can I tell you something about Daniel when he was little? She looked surprised by the change of subject. What? When Daniel was 7 years old, about Lily's age, his father died suddenly. One day he had a daddy who tucked him in every night, and the next day that daddy was gone forever. I sat down next to her at the kitchen table, remembering that terrible time. For months after Frank died, Daniel would ask me when Daddy was coming home. I tried to explain death to a 7-year-old, but he couldn't understand why his father had left him. He started having nightmares, wetting the bed, clinging to me whenever I tried to leave the house. Caroline was listening intently now. One day, Daniel asked me if I was going to leave him too, and I realized that in his mind, people he loved just disappeared without warning. His sense of security was completely shattered. What did you do? I made him a promise. I told him that I would never, ever leave him unless I absolutely had to. That no matter how hard things got, no matter how tired or scared or overwhelmed I felt, I would always be there when he needed me. I looked directly at Caroline. That promise shaped the man Daniel became. He learned that love means showing up, even when it's hard. That families don't abandon each other when things get difficult. But you were his mother. And you're Lily and Mason's mother. Caroline, if you leave today, you'll be teaching your children that mothers disappear when life gets complicated. Is that the lesson you want them to carry forever? Tears started rolling down Caroline's cheeks. I just feel so lost, Ruth. I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself anymore. Then let's figure out how to help you recognize yourself again. But as Caroline the mother, Caroline the wife, Caroline the woman, all of those things together. Not by abandoning parts of who you are. Her phone rang. Kevin, probably wondering where she was. She looked at the screen, then deliberately declined the call. Tell me honestly, Ruth, do you think I'm a terrible mother? I think you're a young mother who's struggling with normal feelings, but contemplating terrible choices. There's a difference. What would you do? If you were me? I thought carefully before answering. If I were you, I would text Kevin right now and tell him I'm not coming. Then I would call Daniel in Dubai and tell him the truth about how I've been feeling. Not accusations or blame, just honest communication about my emotional needs. He'll be furious. He might be. But Caroline, he can't help fix problems he doesn't know exist. And if he truly loves you, which I believe he does, he'll want to work together to find solutions. And then what? Then you start building the life you want within the family you have. You find ways to reclaim your identity without abandoning your responsibilities. She was quiet for several minutes, staring at her hands. Finally, she picked up her phone and started typing. What are you writing? I'm telling Kevin I changed my mind. I felt relief wash over me. That's the right choice, Caroline. But as she hit send, her expression wasn't relief. It was grief. She was mourning the fantasy, the escape, the brief possibility of being someone else entirely. Ruth, What if this is it? What if this is my whole life now? Taking care of other people and never taking care of myself. Caroline, taking care of yourself doesn't mean abandoning everyone else. It means finding balance, setting boundaries, asking for what you need. I don't even know what I need anymore. Then that's where we start. Let's figure out what you need to feel fulfilled while still being present for your family. From the living room, Lily called out, "Mommy, can you help me with this puzzle?" Caroline looked toward her daughter's voice, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not resignation, exactly, but a kind of acceptance. "Coming, sweetheart," she called back. As she stood up, her phone buzzed with Kevin's reply to her cancellation text. She glanced at it, and her face hardened. What did he say? He called me a coward, said I'll always be trapped because I'm too weak to take risks. I felt angry on Caroline's behalf, but also vindicated. Caroline, that message tells you everything you need to know about Kevin's character. A man who truly cared about your well-being would understand your choice to stay with your children. She deleted the message without responding. You're right. He doesn't even know me well enough to call me a coward. Over the next few hours, I watched Caroline slowly reconnect with her children. She helped Lily with her puzzle, read stories to Mason, made lunch for all of us. The desperate, frantic energy from the morning was gradually replaced by something calmer, more genuine. But I could also see that she was grieving the loss of her escape fantasy. Every so often, she'd get a distant look in her eyes, and I knew she was thinking about the plane that had left without her, the adventure she'd chosen not to take. That afternoon, while the children napped, Caroline and I sat down for a real conversation about her marriage, her needs, and her future. Ruth, I want to be a good mother and wife. I really do. But I also want to be myself. How do I balance that? The same way every woman does, honey. Day by day, choice by choice, always remembering that you can be both. What if Daniel doesn't understand? Then you help him understand. And if he still doesn't, then you get professional help to work through it together. And what if none of that works? I looked at this young woman who'd been so close to destroying her family, who was now trying to find a way to save it. Then you'll deal with that when it happens. But Caroline, you can't base today's choices on tomorrow's worst-case scenarios. As the afternoon wore on, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this family could survive Caroline's crisis. But I also knew that the real test would come when Daniel returned from Dubai and they had to face their problems together. The question was, would Caroline have the courage to be as honest with her husband as she'd been forced to be with me? That evening, after the children were in bed, Caroline and I sat in the living room with cups of tea and the weight of everything that had almost happened hanging between us. She'd been quieter as the day progressed, and I could see her processing the magnitude of the choice she'd almost made. Ruth, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were raising Daniel alone, did you ever want to just run away? Even for a day? I set down my teacup, thinking about those early years after Frank died. Honestly? Yes. There were nights when Daniel was sick and I was exhausted and I had to work the next day, and I would sit in my car in the driveway and just cry. I wanted to drive away and not come back. But you didn't. No, I didn't. But Caroline, I'm not going to pretend I was some kind of saint. I called my sister crying more times than I can count. I left Daniel with babysitters so I could go sit in the library just to be alone. I found ways to take breaks without abandoning my responsibilities. She nodded thoughtfully. I don't have a sister, or many friends really. I guess that's part of the problem. Isolation makes everything harder. When you're alone with your thoughts all day, problems seem bigger than they really are. Ruth, there's something else I need to tell you about today. My stomach clenched. What? The money in the kids' college fund, I took some of it. How much? $5,000, to pay for the trip to Cabo. I was going to put it back somehow, but she couldn't meet my eyes. I felt the anger rising again. Taking money from her children's future to fund an affair was a level of selfishness that shocked even me. Caroline, you stole from your children. I know how it sounds. But Ruth, I was desperate. I felt like I was drowning, and Kevin offered me a lifeline. Kevin offered you an affair, not a lifeline, and you were willing to steal from Lily and Mason to pay for it. She started crying again. I hate myself for even thinking about it. What kind of mother considers taking her children's college money to run away with another man? A mother who's having a breakdown and making terrible decisions, I said firmly. But Caroline, you can fix this. The money hasn't been spent, you didn't go on the trip, and your children don't know what almost happened. How do I fix this, Ruth? How do I go back to being a good mother after what I almost did? You start by putting that money back where it belongs. Then you figure out why you got to this point and you make sure it never happens again. She nodded miserably. I already transferred it back. I did that while the kids were napping. That was something, at least. Good. Now, Caroline, I want you to think about this carefully. When exactly did you start feeling this desperate? I don't know. It's been building for months, maybe longer. What changed? What made you go from unhappy wife to woman planning to abandon her family? She was quiet for several minutes, really thinking. I guess it was when Kevin started paying attention to me. For the first time in years, someone was asking me about my dreams, my opinions, my feelings, not about the kids' schedules or what was for dinner, but about me. And that felt good. It felt incredible. Ruth, I hadn't realized how invisible I'd become in my own life until someone started seeing me again. I could understand that, even as I despised the way Kevin had exploited it. Caroline, that feeling of being seen and valued, that's something you need in your marriage. Not from a personal trainer who's trying to get you into bed, but from your husband. But what if Daniel can't give me that? What if he's too used to thinking of me as just the mother of his children? Then you remind him that you're also his wife. But Caroline, you have to be willing to have difficult conversations. You can't expect Daniel to read your mind. What if he doesn't want to change anything? What if he likes our life the way it is? Then you'll have to decide what you're willing to accept and what you're not. But you make that decision based on reality, not on the fantasy some predatory man is selling you. Around 9 o'clock, Caroline's phone rang. Daniel's number. Oh, God, she said, staring at the screen. What am I going to tell him? The truth. Not about Kevin. Not about the trip you almost took, but the truth about how you've been feeling. Ruth, I can't. Caroline, if you want to save your marriage, you have to start with honesty. She answered the call with shaking hands. Hi, honey. I could hear Daniel's voice through the phone, warm and happy. Hey, babe. Sorry I haven't called. The time difference is killing me and the meetings have been non-stop. How are the kids? They're good. They miss you. We all miss you. I miss you too. How are you holding up? I know it's hard when I travel for work. Caroline looked at me and I nodded encouragingly. Actually, Daniel, I've been struggling more than I let on. I think we need to talk when you get home. About some things I've been feeling. There was a pause. Is everything okay? You sound upset. I'm okay, but there are some things about our marriage that I need to discuss with you. Not over the phone, though. When you come home. Caroline, you're scaring me a little. Are you thinking about, are we okay? I watched her face as she made a choice. The choice to fight for her marriage instead of running from it. We're going to be okay, but we need to make some changes. Daniel, I love you, but I've been feeling lost and invisible, and I need your help to fix that. Another pause. Okay, we'll talk as soon as I get home. Caroline, whatever you're feeling, whatever you need, we can work it out together. Promise? I promise. I love you. I love you too. After she hung up, Caroline looked emotionally drained but somehow lighter. How do you feel? I asked. Terrified, but also relieved. Ruth, what if he doesn't understand? What if he thinks I'm being dramatic? Then you'll help him understand. And Caroline, if necessary, you'll get professional help to work through it together. Would you be willing to watch the kids sometimes while we go to counseling? I know it's a lot to ask after today. Caroline, I'll help however I can, but you have to promise me something. What? Promise me that if you start feeling desperate again, you'll call me before you make any major decisions. Promise me you won't run away without talking to someone who loves your children first. I promise, Ruth. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about today, about lying to you, about almost. Caroline, you don't need to apologize to me. You need to apologize to yourself and to your family. But more importantly, you need to make sure this never happens again. That night I slept in the guest room, while Caroline stayed in her own bed for the first time in weeks, she later told me. As I lay there listening to the quiet house, I thought about how close we'd come to disaster. A family could survive many things, but trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. Caroline had come within hours of crossing a line that might have destroyed everything, but she'd chosen to step back from that line. The question now was whether she'd learned enough from this crisis to build something better, or whether the next time temptation came calling, she'd be strong enough to resist it. Only time would tell. But at least now, She'd have to face her problems honestly instead of looking for escape routes. And Daniel would be coming home to a wife who was finally ready to tell him the truth about their marriage. The real work was just beginning. Daniel's flight was scheduled to land Thursday afternoon, giving Caroline and me 2 days to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of her marriage. But those 2 days also revealed just how deep Caroline's problems really went. Wednesday morning, while the children were at school, Caroline received a call that made her face go white. "Who was it?" I asked after she hung up. "Kevin." My blood pressure spiked. "I thought you told him you weren't going." "I did. But Ruth, he's angry. Really angry." Her hands were shaking as she set down the phone. "He said I wasted his money on the trip, that I led him on, that I owe him." "Caroline, you don't owe him anything. He said he's going to tell Daniel about us if I don't pay him back for the plane ticket and hotel." I felt a chill of real fear. Men like Kevin didn't take rejection well, and a vindictive personal trainer with nothing to lose could destroy Caroline's marriage before she had a chance to fix it. "How much money is he talking about?" $3,000. "Ruth, I don't have $3,000. Daniel handles all our finances. If I tried to get that much money, he'd want to know what it was for." "Good, because you're not paying Kevin a penny." But if he tells Daniel, then Daniel finds out from Kevin instead of from you." "Caroline, you cannot let this man blackmail you." But I could see she was terrified. The fantasy of her harmless emotional affair was colliding with the reality of what Kevin actually was. A predator who'd been planning to exploit her vulnerability and was now trying to profit from her near betrayal. "Ruth, what am I going to do?" "We're going to call the police." "What? No, I can't." "Caroline, Kevin is attempting extortion. That's a crime. But then everyone will know what almost happened. Better that than letting him control your life through threats." We spent the morning researching Caroline's options, and what we found was sobering. Kevin's behavior fell into a clear pattern of predatory manipulation, targeting vulnerable married women, isolating them from their support systems, then using threats and intimidation when they tried to break free. "Ruth, look at this." Caroline showed me her laptop screen where she'd found Kevin's social media profiles. "He's done this before." The evidence was right there in his photos and posts. Kevin with various women at romantic locations, always the same pattern. Troubled marriages, young mothers, expensive trips that the women clearly couldn't afford on their own. "Caroline, you weren't special to him. You were a type." She stared at the screen, seeing for the first time how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. "I feel so stupid." "You feel stupid because you are stupid," I said bluntly. "But Caroline, being stupid isn't a permanent condition. You can learn from this." That afternoon, while I picked up the children from school, Caroline made 2 phone calls. The first was to the police, to report Kevin's extortion attempts. The second was to a family law attorney, to understand her legal options if Kevin tried to follow through on his threats. When I returned with Lily and Mason, I found Caroline in the kitchen, looking drained, but somehow more solid than she'd seemed in days. "What did you find out?" "The police said they'd document Kevin's threats, but unless he actually demands money or damages something, there's not much they can do." But the attorney said something interesting. "What's that?" "She said that if Kevin tries to interfere in my marriage through blackmail or harassment, that's grounds for a restraining order. And if he costs Daniel his job or damages our family through malicious disclosure, we could sue him for damages." "So Kevin has more to lose than you do." "Exactly. Ruth, I think I need to call his bluff." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm going to tell Daniel everything before Kevin gets a chance to twist the story." I felt proud of Caroline for the first time since this whole ordeal began. That takes courage. I'm tired of being a coward. I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions for me. That evening, after the children were asleep, Caroline and I planned exactly what she would tell Daniel. Not the full truth about Mexico and Kevin. That would come later if their marriage survived the initial conversation. But the honest truth about her unhappiness, her feelings of isolation, and her need for change. "Caroline, the most important thing is that Daniel understands this isn't about him being a bad husband. This is about you not knowing how to ask for what you need. But what if he thinks I'm ungrateful? We have a good life compared to a lot of people. Having a good life and being happy with that life aren't the same thing. Daniel needs to understand that you can appreciate what you have and still need more." Thursday morning brought a text from Kevin that made Caroline's hands shake. Last chance to do this the easy way. Caroline showed me the message, then did something that surprised me. She took a screenshot, saved it to a file, and blocked Kevin's number. There, she said firmly. Now he can't contact me anymore. What about his threat to tell Daniel? Let him try. I'm telling Daniel myself tonight. Daniel's flight landed at 3 p.m. Caroline and I agreed that I would take the children for ice cream and a trip to the park, giving them privacy for their conversation. As I loaded Lily and Mason into my car, I saw Caroline standing in the doorway, looking terrified but determined. This conversation would either save their marriage or end it, and she knew it. Wish me luck, Ruth. You don't need luck, Caroline. You need honesty and courage, and you've got both of those now. At the ice cream shop, Lily asked me a question that nearly broke my heart. Grandma Ruth, are Mommy and Daddy getting divorced? Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Because Mommy's been crying a lot, and she keeps looking at her phone like she's scared of it. 6-year-olds noticed everything, apparently. Sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to talk about, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean anyone is getting divorced. Will you tell me if they do? I looked at this innocent little face, these children who had no idea how close their world had come to exploding. Lily, I promise you that whatever happens, you and Mason will be loved and taken care of. That's the only thing you need to worry about. But privately, I was worried too. Caroline's crisis had exposed fundamental problems in their marriage: communication issues, financial control, emotional neglect. Even with the best intentions, some damage couldn't be undone. When I brought the children home 2 hours later, I found Caroline and Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, both looking emotionally exhausted but not angry. How did it go? I whispered to Caroline while Daniel hugged the children. Better than I expected, she whispered back. We have a lot of work to do, but Ruth, he listened. He really listened. That night, Daniel asked me to stay for dinner so we could all talk together as a family. Mom, he said, using the formal address he reserved for serious conversations. Caroline told me about her struggles and about how you helped her work through them. I want you to know how grateful I am. Daniel, I just did what any grandmother would do. No, you did more than that. You probably saved our marriage. Caroline reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Ruth, without you here these past few days, I would have made the biggest mistake of my life. As I looked around the table at my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren, I realized that sometimes families don't survive because they avoid crises. They survive because they face them together. Caroline's breakdown had been terrifying, but it had also forced conversations that were long overdue. The question now was whether they could build something stronger from the pieces of what had almost been broken. 3 weeks after Daniel's return from Dubai, I was babysitting Lily and Mason while their parents attended their first marriage counseling session. It had taken that long for Caroline to work up the courage to tell Daniel about Kevin and the trip she'd almost taken. The conversation hadn't gone well. Ruth, I've never seen Daniel so angry, Caroline had confided in me the day after their explosive confrontation. Not just angry, hurt, betrayed. I think I broke something in him that I can't fix. Daniel had moved into the guest room temporarily while they worked through what he called the full scope of Caroline's deception. Those were his words, delivered with the cold precision of someone trying very hard not to lose control completely. But they were still going to counseling together, which I took as a positive sign. And Daniel had asked me to continue helping with the children while they figured things out, which suggested he trusted my judgment even if he was struggling to trust his wife's. Grandma Ruth, Lily said, looking up from the puzzle we were working on. Why doesn't Daddy sleep in the big bed with Mommy anymore? These were the moments I dreaded, when innocent questions forced me to navigate around adult problems that children shouldn't have to understand. Sometimes married people need space to think about things, I said carefully. It doesn't mean they don't love each other. But when my friend Katie's parents needed space, they got divorced. Mason looked up from his coloring book with worried eyes. Are Mommy and Daddy getting divorced? I set down the puzzle piece I'd been holding and pulled both children closer to me. I don't know what's going to happen with your parents, but I want you both to understand something very important. Even if grown-ups have problems, even if families change, you are both loved completely and unconditionally. By Mommy and Daddy? By Mommy and Daddy, and by me, and by lots of people. That will never change, no matter what happens. An hour later, Daniel and Caroline returned from counseling, and I could tell from their body language that the session had been difficult. They weren't touching, weren't even making eye contact, but they also weren't radiating the kind of anger that meant someone was about to storm out. "How did it go?" I asked quietly, while the children ran upstairs to play. Daniel rubbed his forehead, looking older than his 32 years. "The therapist says we have significant communication issues and trust deficits that will require intensive work to repair." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Caroline answered, her voice small. "It means Daniel doesn't know if he can ever trust me again, and I don't know if I deserve his trust. And it means," Daniel added with careful control, "that we're both going to have to change fundamental things about how we relate to each other if this marriage is going to survive." I looked between them, seeing two people who loved each other but were drowning in hurt and uncertainty. What did the therapist recommend? Individual therapy for both of us, couples counseling twice a week, and something called structured communication exercises, Caroline said. "Plus, I need to have no contact with Kevin whatsoever, which I've already done, and I need to be completely transparent about my activities and whereabouts until Daniel feels secure again." "How do you feel about those requirements?" "Honestly?" Caroline looked exhausted, relieved. "I've been carrying around this guilt and shame for weeks, and having concrete steps to fix things makes me feel like maybe it's not hopeless." Daniel was quiet, staring out the window. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When Dad died and you were raising me alone, did you ever feel like you made the wrong choice? Did you ever wish you'd made different decisions about your life?" The question surprised me with its directness. "You mean, did I ever wish I hadn't had you?" "I guess that's what I'm asking, yeah." I thought carefully before answering. "Daniel, there were times when I felt overwhelmed, when I wondered what my life would have looked like if I'd made different choices. But I never, not once, wished you didn't exist or wished I wasn't your mother. But it's different for Caroline. She chose this life, chose me, chose to have children, and now she's saying she wants something else." "Daniel," Caroline said quietly, "I'm not saying I want something else instead of you and the kids. I'm saying I want something more, along with you and the kids. But you were willing to abandon us to get it, for 3 days, and I didn't go. Because my mother stopped you, not because you changed your mind on your own." I could see this conversation spiraling into another argument, so I intervened. "Can I share an observation?" They both looked at me. "You're both right, and you're both wrong. Caroline, you're right that you need an identity beyond mother and wife, but you were completely wrong about how to get it. Daniel, you're right to feel betrayed and hurt, but you're wrong if you think Caroline's needs aren't legitimate." "So what's the solution?" Daniel asked. "The solution is that you both have to become different people than you were before this crisis. Daniel, you have to learn to see Caroline as a complete person with her own dreams and needs. Caroline, you have to learn to pursue those dreams in ways that strengthen your family instead of threatening it." Over the next few weeks, I watched my son and daughter-in-law slowly, painfully, begin to rebuild their marriage on a foundation of brutal honesty. It wasn't pretty. There were more fights, more tears, more nights when Daniel slept in the guest room because he couldn't bear to be in the same bed as someone who'd almost betrayed him. But there were also small victories. Caroline started attending online college courses 2 evenings a week while Daniel watched the children. Daniel began coming home for lunch twice a week, so Caroline could have uninterrupted time to herself. They instituted a weekly marriage meeting where they discussed their needs, concerns, and appreciation for each other in a structured way. Most importantly, they both seemed to be taking responsibility for their part in the crisis. "Ruth," Caroline said during one of our regular check-in conversations, "I realize now that I was waiting for Daniel to read my mind and solve problems I'd never told him about. That's not fair to anyone." And from Daniel, "I think I was so focused on being a good provider that I forgot to be a good partner." Caroline needed a husband, not just a paycheck. The turning point came 6 weeks after the Dubai trip, when Kevin showed up at their house. Caroline called me, panicked. "Ruth, he's here. Kevin's at the front door, and he says he wants to talk to Daniel." "Where's Daniel?" "At work." "Ruth, I don't know what to do. The kids are here, and he's demanding that I let him in." "Call the police." "Right now." "But, Caroline, call 911. This is exactly the kind of harassment the attorney warned you about." 20 minutes later, I arrived at Caroline's house to find Kevin being arrested for trespassing and harassment. As the police led him away in handcuffs, he shouted threats about exposing the truth and making them pay. Caroline was shaking, but she'd handled the situation exactly right. She'd called the police, documented everything, and protected her children. When Daniel came home and found out what had happened, something shifted in his relationship with Caroline. For the first time since learning about her near affair, he seemed to see her as the victim of Kevin's manipulation, rather than just someone who'd almost betrayed him. "I should have been here," he said, holding Caroline while she cried from the stress and relief. "You couldn't have known he'd show up, but I should have taken his threats more seriously. Caroline, I'm sorry you had to handle that alone." As I watched them comfort each other, I realized that Kevin's appearance had actually been a gift. It had reminded Daniel that Caroline wasn't just someone who'd almost cheated. She was also someone who'd been targeted by a predator and had ultimately chosen her family over easy escape. That night, for the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't sleep in the guest room. 3 days later, Caroline got a call that would change everything again, but this time, in a way none of us saw coming. "Ruth," she said, her voice strange, "I need to tell you something. Kevin's been arrested for more than just harassing me." "What do you mean?" "The police found evidence that he's been running this same scam on multiple women, taking money for trips that never happened, blackmailing married women, even stealing from some of them." "Ruth, I wasn't his only victim. I was just his latest." As the full scope of Kevin's crimes became clear, Caroline realized how close she'd come to being destroyed by someone who'd never cared about her at all. But more importantly, she realized how much she had to be grateful for in the life she'd almost thrown away. The phone call from Detective Morrison came on a Tuesday morning, while Caroline, the children, and I were having breakfast. Daniel had already left for work, and Caroline answered with the cautious tone she'd developed whenever strangers called. "Mrs. Parker, this is Detective Morrison with the Cleveland Police. We need to speak with you about Kevin Walsh." Caroline's face went pale. "Has something happened?" "Ma'am, we've arrested Mr. Walsh on multiple charges of fraud, extortion, and theft. Your case was just the tip of the iceberg. We need you to come in and provide a formal statement." After Caroline hung up, she stared at the phone in her hands. "Ruth, they said Kevin had been doing this to other women for years. They found evidence of at least 12 other victims. Other women he was manipulating? Other married women he convinced to steal money from their families, other women he blackmailed, other women whose lives he nearly destroyed." She looked sick. "Ruth, what if I hadn't changed my mind? What if I'd gone to Cabo with him?" I thought about that scenario. Caroline alone in Mexico, with a man who turned out to be a career criminal. Let's not think about what ifs. You didn't go, and now he's facing consequences for what he did to you and those other women. Later that day, Caroline went to the police station to give her statement. When she returned, she looked shaken, but somehow lighter. "Ruth, one of the other women, was there when I arrived. Her name is Patricia, and she's 43 years old with 3 teenage children. Kevin convinced her to take out a second mortgage on her house to pay for a business venture they were going to start together." "How much money?" $80,000. He disappeared with all of it, and she almost lost her house. Ruth, she said talking to the police was the first time in 2 years that she didn't feel completely ashamed of what happened to her. I could see that learning about the other victims was helping Caroline process her own experience differently. She wasn't a foolish woman who'd almost destroyed her family for a meaningless fling. She was one of many women who'd been targeted by a sophisticated predator. "Did you tell Daniel about this?" "Not yet. He's at work, but I want to tell him tonight." "Ruth, I think this might help him understand that what happened to me wasn't really about our marriage. It was about Kevin being a professional manipulator." That evening, Daniel's reaction to the news about Kevin's other victims was exactly what Caroline had hoped for. His anger shifted from his wife to the man who'd exploited her vulnerability. "Caroline, I want you to know something," he said, as they sat in the living room after the children were in bed. "Learning about Kevin's pattern doesn't excuse what almost happened, but it helps me understand it better." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you weren't having a normal affair. You were being victimized by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate women in your situation." I watched from the kitchen as my son and daughter-in-law had the most honest conversation they'd had since this whole ordeal began. "Daniel, I need you to know that even though Kevin was manipulating me, the feelings I had were real. My unhappiness, my sense of being trapped, that was all real. I know. And Caroline, I need you to know that some of that unhappiness was my fault. I did treat you like a live-in babysitter instead of my partner. We both made mistakes. Yeah, but your mistakes almost destroyed our family. Caroline flinched but didn't argue. You're right. And Daniel, I don't know how to prove to you that I'll never do anything like that again. You prove it by being different, by making different choices every day. 3 weeks later, Caroline got a call that surprised all of us. It was from the prosecutor's office. They wanted her to testify at Kevin's trial. They said my case is important because I'm the only victim who didn't go through with giving him money or going on a trip with him, Caroline explained. They want to show the jury what Kevin's manipulation looked like and how it could have escalated. Are you going to do it? I think I have to. Ruth, that woman Patricia I met at the police station? She lost her house. Another woman they interviewed lost her marriage and custody of her children. If testifying helps put Kevin away so he can't do this to anyone else, then I need to do it. Daniel was supportive, but worried. Caroline, testifying means our whole story becomes public record. Everyone will know what almost happened. I know, but Daniel, I'm tired of being ashamed. What Kevin did was wrong, and hiding it just protects him. The trial took place 4 months later. I sat in the gallery watching Caroline testify about Kevin's manipulation tactics, about how he'd isolated her from her support system, about how close she'd come to destroying her life for a man who turned out to be a criminal. Her testimony was powerful because it was honest about her own mistakes while clearly illustrating Kevin's predatory behavior. She didn't portray herself as a victim who bore no responsibility. She portrayed herself as someone who'd been vulnerable to manipulation and had made terrible choices as a result. When Kevin's defense attorney tried to suggest that Caroline had been a willing participant in an affair, she responded with a clarity that made me proud. Sir, I was a willing participant in conversations with a man I thought cared about me. I was not a willing participant in being manipulated, lied to, and ultimately blackmailed by a career criminal. Kevin was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. More importantly, the trial exposed his methods so thoroughly that other potential victims would recognize the patterns if someone tried to use them again. After the trial, Caroline and Daniel's marriage counselor suggested they write letters to each other, not to exchange, but to process their feelings about everything that had happened. Caroline showed me part of her letter. I almost threw away the most important things in my life because I didn't know how to ask for help. I almost hurt the people I love most because I was too proud to admit I was struggling. I will never forgive myself for coming so close to destroying our family, but I will spend the rest of my life proving that I learned from it. Daniel's letter, which he did share with Caroline, included these words. I almost lost my wife because I was so busy providing for our family that I forgot to actually connect with the people I was providing for. I treated our marriage like a business arrangement instead of a partnership. 6 months after Kevin's conviction, Caroline graduated with her associate's degree in business administration. She'd finished her coursework online while managing her household and attending counseling. At her graduation ceremony, Daniel and the children cheered from the audience while I wiped away proud tears. After the ceremony, Caroline pulled me aside. Ruth, I want you to know something. The night Kevin was arrested, when I realized how completely I'd been manipulated, I felt like the stupidest woman in the world. And now? Now I feel like a woman who survived something terrible and came out stronger. I feel like someone who made awful mistakes, but learned from them. I feel like someone who's building the life she actually wants, instead of running away from the life she has. Looking at Caroline, confident, educated, honest about her past, while focused on her future, I realized that sometimes the worst crises can become the best teachers. She'd almost destroyed her family, but in learning not to, she'd become someone worthy of the family she'd almost lost. The question now was, what would they build together with all they'd learned about themselves and each other? 2 years after that terrifying 4 a.m. phone call, I stood in Caroline and Daniel's backyard watching my daughter-in-law graduate from the university's MBA program. She'd worked for it while raising her children, managing her household, and rebuilding her marriage one honest conversation at a time. Grandma Ruth, look! Mason, now 6 years old, ran up to me holding a photo he'd taken with Caroline's phone. Mommy threw her hat in the air like on TV. 8-year-old Lily was more sophisticated in her excitement. Grandma, did you know Mommy got something called magna cum laude? Daddy says it means she was one of the smartest students. I smiled, remembering the broken woman who'd called me 2 years ago, claiming my son had abandoned her. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to face her problems instead of running from them. Your mommy worked very hard for this, I told both children. She should be proud. We're all proud, Daniel said, appearing beside me with his arm around Caroline's shoulders. The easy affection between them had taken months to rebuild, but it was genuine now, built on a foundation of honesty rather than assumptions. Caroline was glowing with accomplishment, wearing her graduation cap over the navy blue dress she'd bought for her first job interview. Yes, job interview. 3 weeks ago, she'd accepted a position as a financial analyst with a local nonprofit organization. Part-time to start, with the potential for growth as the children got older. Ruth, Caroline said, pulling me into a hug, I have something for you. She handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a pendant, simple silver with an inscription, to the woman who taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's making the right choice despite the fear. Caroline, this is beautiful. Ruth, you saved my family, not just by stopping me from making the worst mistake of my life, but by showing me what real strength looks like. Later that evening, after the celebration dinner, and after the children were asleep, Caroline, Daniel, and I sat on their back porch with glasses of wine and the comfortable silence that comes from people who've weathered something difficult together. Ruth, Daniel said, there's something I want to tell you about that morning 2 years ago. What's that? When Caroline called you at 4 a.m., I was awake in my hotel room in Dubai, staring at the ceiling and worrying about our marriage. Caroline looked surprised. You never told me that, because I felt guilty about it. Caroline, I knew you were unhappy. I could see it in the way you'd gotten quiet, the way you seemed disconnected from everything. But I didn't know how to talk to you about it, so I just hoped it would get better on its own. What were you thinking about in that hotel room? I asked. I was thinking about how my wife had become a stranger to me. How we lived in the same house and raised the same children, but barely talked about anything that mattered anymore. I was wondering if our marriage was slowly dying, and neither of us knew how to save it. Caroline reached for his hand. If I hadn't called Ruth, if I'd gone to Cabo with Kevin, would you have fought for our marriage when you got home? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Honestly, Caroline, if I'd come home to find you gone and the kids abandoned, I think I would have been so hurt and angry that I wouldn't have been able to see past the betrayal. So Ruth calling the police on Kevin, forcing me to face the truth about what I was doing, that saved us? No, I interjected. You choosing to stay, choosing to tell the truth, choosing to do the work, that saved you. All I did was give you the space to make better choices. Ruth's right, Daniel said. Caroline, you could have doubled down on the lies. You could have blamed me for your unhappiness instead of taking responsibility for your choices. You could have given up when the work got hard. And Daniel, Caroline added, you could have left when you found out about Kevin. You could have decided I wasn't worth the effort to rebuild trust. I looked at these two young people who'd nearly lost everything and had chosen instead to fight for it. What did you both learn from all of this? Daniel answered first. I learned that being a good husband means more than just bringing home a paycheck and not cheating. It means actually knowing the person I'm married to, paying attention to her needs, being a real partner instead of just a roommate who shares expenses. And I learned, Caroline said, that being unhappy doesn't give me the right to blow up my life. That if I need something to change, I have to ask for it directly instead of expecting people to read my mind. And that running away from problems doesn't solve them. It just creates bigger problems. What about the children? I asked. How do you think this experience affected them? Honestly, Caroline looked thoughtful. I think it showed them that families can go through difficult times and come out stronger. Lily asked me recently if Daddy and I were ever going to get divorced, and I was able to tell her honestly that we'd worked through our problems and our marriage was stronger now than it had been before. And, Daniel added, I think it's teaching them that people make mistakes, but they can learn from them. That's a lesson I want them to understand before they're adults and making big decisions themselves. 6 months later, I received a call from Caroline that made my day. Ruth, I got promoted to full-time at work, and Daniel and I have been talking about having another baby. How do you feel about that? Excited, nervous, but Ruth, this time I know I can be a mother without losing myself. I know how to ask for help when I need it, how to maintain my own identity while still being present for my family. And Daniel's on board? He's the one who suggested it. He said he wants to experience parenthood as true partners this time, instead of him working and me just managing everything at home. A year later, I was holding my newest grandchild, baby Sarah, while Caroline nursed her and simultaneously reviewed quarterly reports for her nonprofit. Daniel was in the kitchen making dinner, while Lily helped and Mason set the table. "Ruth," Caroline said softly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't answered your phone that morning?" I looked around at this warm, chaotic, loving family scene. Sometimes. But Caroline, that's not the story that happened. This is the story that happened. You called for help, you chose your family, you did the work to build something better. Do you think Kevin ever thinks about the families he almost destroyed? I don't know, and I don't care. What matters is that you learned from what he tried to do to you, and you chose to become someone stronger because of it. As I sat there holding baby Sarah, watching her parents work together to manage their busy, happy household, I realized that some of the best family stories are the ones about people who almost lost everything and chose to fight to keep it instead. Caroline had called me at 4 a.m., claiming her son had abandoned her, when the truth was that she was planning to abandon her family. But in the space between that lie and the truth, she'd discovered who she really wanted to be. And sometimes, that's all the second chance any of us needs. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, what score from 0 to 10 would you give this story? Your feedback helps me create even better content for all of us. Looking back now, I realize that the worst phone call I ever received became one of the most important conversations of my life. Not because it was easy, but because it taught all of us that love isn't just about being there for the good times. It's about being there when someone you care about is making the worst choices of their life and helping them find their way back to who they really want to be. And Ruth Parker, I learned, was exactly the kind of grandmother who would always answer that call.